we're live. Welcome, everyone. I just published a blog post on how to upgrade a DoneJS plugin from CanJS 2 to CanJS 3. So this training is going to kind of go over the updated migration guide that we just published today and kind of step through the migration guide and then apply that to our project. So it's going to cover a lot of the it's going to cover essentially the same steps that are in the blog post, but in a different way of going through the guide and seeing how that applies to our example project. So with me today, I have John. Say hi, John.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to try and look at the YouTube chat every once in a while. So if you are watching this and you have questions, please feel free to post in there. And then obviously, John, step in when you have questions. Okay. Sweet. You should be able to see the migration guide right now. John, can you see it? Could I?
Yep. Yeah. I can.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. So we just published an updated version of this migration guide earlier today. What's different about it is that we provide a little bit more information on the transition from CanJS 2.x to CanJS 3. We added this first section, which is stuff that you can do and kind of changes that you can make in your CanJS 2 project before even moving to 3 that kind of sets you up for being able to migrate easier. So the way that I like to think about it is there are changes in 3 that you can already do in your CanJS 2 project to make it easier to upgrade. So we added that section. These 3 sections were already there, and we've just fleshed them out a little bit more. So this minimal migration path is the very bare minimum you have to accomplish to be able to start running CanJS 3 in your project. The modernize, and you could stop there. You could move to the main Can module and you're upgraded to 3 and that's it. But that doesn't really take advantage of everything that CanJS 3 has to offer. So we have these additional steps. The modernized path is essentially moving to the new broken up NPM packages. So instead of depending on the main Can package, using Can map or Candifying or any of the other broken up packages, Can components, etc. The latest in migration is moving from the legacy libraries like CanList and CanMap to what's their kind of new shiny replacements. So Candifying is a good example of that. Another example is moving Can model code to using Can Connect directly. And then this last step in the guide are things that we kind of mentioned, things that we might deprecate or we might remove in a future release, like a CanJS 4 release. So there are things that you can do in your CanJS 3 app to kind of set yourself up for upgrading even past CanJS 3. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, if you use the main, the big like Can module instead of using like the individual pieces, will any code ever get taken out of that? Even like legacy code?
What do you mean? Sorry, say that again.
So if you, so in regards to the how to avoid future deprecations and removals, if you're using the main Can package, CanJS package, rather than the individual modules, will anything ever get taken out of that? I know things are deprecated, but will stuff actually get removed?
Yeah, not for the 3 release. So if you're using like can.all.js as a global script, or you're using the main Can package, that is versioned based on what's in core and what's in infrastructure. So any changes to, if there were any like removals of APIs in these projects, then that would be a major version for them, and then it would be a major version for CanJS too. Does that make sense?
Yep. Cool.
Cool. Sweet. And no questions in the chat. So what I want to do is I want to step through this guide and apply it to a DoneJS plugin. Now, a DoneJS plugin is a little bit different from a DoneJS app. The full DoneJS app is, like it's a single page web application. But DoneJS has a plugin generator where you can create code that's reusable in other projects using the DoneJS technologies. So we're going to specifically be talking about upgrading a plugin, although all of this information applies to upgrading an app. And that's a future blog post that we'll publish as well. So the example app that I want to demo or upgrade today is DoneJS number input. We published a blog post about this previously, so I thought it was a good example for something to upgrade. The big things for the plugin is when you build it, it creates a dist folder, so it's reusable in another project. So I just ran npm install, and you can see that we're just on the master branch, not upgraded yet. So when I run node build, that'll create the dist folder and have all of the files that we would kind of distribute through npm or what have you. So it's working, and I can run npm test, and we'll see that it launches Firefox and all of the tests are passing. Sweet. Okay, so that's actually the first step before upgrading any project, is make sure that you have a successful build and that your tests are passing, because it's risky to try and upgrade an app where not all of the tests are passing, because you won't know if there are regressions that are caused by the upgrade or if there are already existing issues in the code base. So for our app, our project builds and all of the tests pass. So let's start going through the sections. This first one is related to how you include can in your code. So it's maybe before 2.3, I'm not sure when, but you might be writing code like this, where you just import the can module and then use what's on it, like can.components for the component functionality in 2.3. And what we suggest is that you use the module, or kind of the module folders instead to import your code. So using can component to bring in the component module. The reason why we recommend doing this is because you're just bringing in the code that you need, not the entire can package. And later, it's going to be easier to upgrade in the future, because we're going to replace this can component with just can components in one of the steps. Does that make sense? Does this step make sense?
Following along so far.
Cool. So we have a list of all of the things that you can find in your app, and all of the module folders. So you can kind of search for can.component in your app and replace it with can/component/components. In our app, let's go to our code. So this plugin is really just a couple of pieces. The big thing, I wish the highlighting wasn't wrong. You know what? Let me open this in Atom, because it won't aggressively highlight it incorrectly. So the main part of this plugin code is this DoneJS number input.js in the source folder. And this is the majority of the code. So the step about moving away from using just the can and importing the folders is not applicable, because we're already following best practices with regards to that. We're already importing can, or importing components and importing map as separate modules instead of just importing can. And you'll notice the syntax is a little bit different from what you see in the migration guide, because we're using Steel.js to build it. So we're using the shortened syntax. So this is the same as the shortened syntax in Steel. So this step isn't applicable to us. We don't have to update any of our code. Similarly, we're not using the $ off can for getting access to jQuery. So we don't have any uses of can.$ in our app. If we did, we'd just follow the suggestion of importing jQuery directly. So those steps, our code is already good. The last one is related to setting leak scope on components. This one is also not applicable to us. We do have a component, and you can see its definition down here. We're not depending on it being able to access scope from outside of the component. So it doesn't really matter if we have leak scope as true or false. If we wanted to,
scope is always defaulting to false, right? If you don't set it.
Yeah. So in prior versions in CanJS 2, leak scope was true by default. So this step is if that might bite you in upgrading to 3, which has leak scope as false or as defaults to false. Then you can explicitly set leak scope in your CanJS 2 app prior to upgrading to 3. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, so if we depended on that, we could set leak scope to true, but that's not something that our component depends on, so we're not going to make any changes for that. Okay, those are the sections that we have for the pre-migration, and none of them are applicable to our plugin. So our code is already good to go for the minimal migration path. So the first thing that we're going to do is install Can. So we'll run npm install can, and I'm specifying app 3 just because I was having issues with npm earlier where it was installing the wrong version. You shouldn't need to do this, but I'm going to do it for now because my system was being wonky. So we're going to run npm install can at version 3 and then save it to our package.json. So this will upgrade the can dependency in our node modules folder from 2.3 point whatever it was before to the latest version of CanJS 3. And it's installed. Great. So going back to the migration guide, you can kind of verify that it works correctly because you'll see this change in your package.json. Let's look at the diff. And you can see our package.json was upgraded to use CanJS 3.3.0. So we've got the latest version of CanJS 3. So we've upgraded we already covered that we're not importing can like this. So we don't need to import can legacy. I'm gonna go through these kind of quickly, but obviously the guide has more details. In our components, we don't have, we're not using the inserted or removed events, which have changed behavior. So that doesn't apply. We're not using can view. That doesn't apply to us. We're not really dealing with promises anywhere. That also doesn't apply. We don't have any helpers where we're passing this, so this doesn't apply. We're not depending on global variables being set through this use of can construct, so it doesn't apply. But we are using stash templates with Steel, so this step definitely applies to us. So I'm gonna copy this command and paste it into the terminal and run it. So in making the code a little bit more modular, we've made a Steel stash module that handles loading stash templates with Steel. So that doesn't come by default anymore. So we just need to install Steel Stash. And we'll look at the diff, and you can see that Steel Stash was added to our dependencies. And that's it. There's no code level changes for the Steel Stash module. We can run our build and run our tests to make sure that everything is working correctly with CanJS 3. So our build was successful. It put out all of those files, and then we'll run npm test to see if it works correctly with CanJS 3. Sweet. So for our plugin, running those two commands, running npm install can and saving it to our package.json, and then npm install Steel Stash, saving it in, was all that we needed to do to upgrade our plugin to CanJS 3, which I think is pretty slick. Any questions or comments before we move on to the next section?
I think I'm good.
Cool. Real quick, what's the best way to know if you're using Steel Stash?
That's a good question. Hi, Ryan. I didn't see you join us.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little late.
Yeah, no worries. So if you are using Steel.js and you have stash templates, then you need to use Steel Stash. So this is basically across the board. If you're using CanJS with Steel and upgrading from CanJS 2 to CanJS 3, you're going to need to install this dependency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sweet. Any other questions before we move on to the modernized migration path? Cool. Okay. So the modernized path. I mentioned earlier that this is all about moving from the main can module to the broken up, the individual modules. So instead of requiring, kind of going with our example before, instead of requiring can and then using can.components, which we already covered, or in what's going to be applicable to us is requiring can component and then using it. Actually installing and using the can component module and starting to use the smaller modules. So in the, I kind of want to go to this is the blog post that was that was published just an hour or two ago. So what I did is I included the screp commands, which makes it really easy to see where in our code we're using can slash. So where we might have an import statement or a require statement that has can slash. And then I'm excluding our dist where our build files are going in node modules because that's where all of our packages are. So we can, let me go back here and clear. So I'm just gonna paste this command and run it. Now we have a really easy list of all of the places where we're using can slash in our app. So here in our in this HTML file, we're using can view auto render. In our JS file, we're importing can component and can map, and also can map define. So one thing that we added to the migration guide recently is a mapping of all of the different modules that you might be importing, and then what their equivalent broken up module is in CanJS 3. So essentially, we can go through this list and search for what's in what grep found, and then find the new appropriate module. And we're going to need to install all of these, right? Because right now we have the main can module installed. So we're going to want to install all of these smaller modules. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So I'm just going to go through the grep list and install these modules. So we'll npm install can view auto render and also save it to our package.json. Next, we'll look at can components, which is up here, which most of these are just the shortened and hyphenated version. So can component is just the can component module. So npm install that, and we'll save that as well. Next one is can map. So if we go to our list, can map, and npm install can map. And then the last one is can map define. Again, go to list, can map define. Find it here, npm install, and save it. Cool, so we have these installed, and now we can actually use them in our project. So let's open up those two files. The first, we'll actually do the HTML file first. So this is where can view auto render is being used. So now we'll just replace this with the name of the module that we installed and saved it. We'll do the same thing here. We'll use the module instead of the main can component. Okay, I think those were all four: can component, can map define, and then the can view auto render. Excuse me. Okay, so that is it. That's everything that's in this modernized migration path. So one thing that I mentioned in the blog post was after you have all of the dependencies installed, you can uninstall can because it's not going to be, you can uninstall the main can module because it's not going to be used anymore. So we're going to run npm uninstall can and also save that to our package.json. And when we look at our dependencies now, you'll see that we have can component, can map define, and can view auto render, and we no longer need the main can module. Let's test this. We're going to run our build script, make sure that it can build our plugin, and it still does. And we'll run npm test to make sure that all of the tests are passing. I'll launch Firefox, and hey, they're all passing. So now we're using all of the broken up modules instead of the main can module, which means it's going to be a lot easier to upgrade those independently and not bring so much code into your project as well.
And Jason, there's no issue with or no conflict if you kept the full can module and then started like slowly going through and importing these, right? Like it's not gonna conflict. It's just gonna be inefficient.
Yeah, correct. I actually haven't tried that, but I can't think of any reason because the versions would be the same, or as long as the versions that are installed separately and are in the main can module, as long as those are the same, I don't think there would be any issues with taking a more like piecemeal approach to moving to the individual modules.
Cool.
Any other questions or comments?
Nope.
Sweet. Okay. So we've already gone through the modernize step. Let me go back to the guide. So this latest and greatest migration path. This is kind of the extra credit if you want to go above and beyond and move from some of the packages that are that we've marked as legacy or deprecated and move to their new replacements. Then this is the path you can follow. So the first step here is moving from can map to can define. So can map and can map define here. Let me actually go back to the code to show what we're talking about. So here we imported can map and we're using the define plugin with can map. So that gives us this syntax where we can create a view model by extending CanMap, and then we have this define property, and that's using the CanMap define plugin. So all of this will, all of this works in our CanJS 3 app. You don't have to migrate from CanMap and the CanMap define plugin to Candifying, but we've created a new module called Candifying that, as far as I know, it's faster. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit easier to work with because there's no longer this define object that's required. And this is where we're going to be putting in our development efforts. That doesn't mean that CanMap, just the CanMap module, is going to stop working. We have lots of apps that we've built that will continue to use CanMap, and we know there's a lot of people in the community that will continue to use it. So we'll still be accepting bug fixes for it, but we're going to focus our efforts on improving Candifying in the future, and it's kind of the one of the observable types that we see as the future for CanJS.
And that includes list now, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So if we go under legacy, we can see that CanList and CanMap were separate, and then there were the backup and define plugins to work with CanMap. So under the Candifying module, list and map are both included in that. So it's just one Candifying module for both of those types. Any other questions or comments before we get into the meat of starting to move to Candifying? Sweet. Okay. So we already have in our sample code or in our example plugin that we're using CanMap. So we're going to replace it with Candifying. Let's first install the module. So we'll npm install Candifying and save it to our package.json. And then the entire upgrade is, let's go back to Adam. The entire upgrade is using Candifying map instead of CanMap. And we can see we're just using the shorter sealed syntax again. So let me rename this define map just to make it clear that that's what we're using. And then because Candifying map has the define plugins functionality built in, we can remove this import statement. So it's actually less code to use it. So we have our define map. We're going to replace the map that we have here with define map. We no longer need to have this define object. These values can just be moved into the main object, so they're next to each other. And then the last thing is that adder isn't required anymore. Because you're defining all of the properties that are on the define map, we don't need you to call adder for that to be observable anymore. So we're going to replace all of these uses. We're going to replace all of our adder uses with just the property names. Does that make sense, by the way?
Yeah. Is adder backwards compatible, or is it completely non-usable now with 3?
Oh, you know what?
You get a deprecation warning now.
Okay.
Sweet. There you go. And let's replace these last few. And we have some down here as well. So we'll replace those. If my regex skills were good. I'm sure that you could write this better. And actually, so we're using adder to set this value here. So we can actually really simplify this more by saying this dot value is equal to that. And then we'll do the same thing here, where this dot value is equal to that. Okay, so I think those are all of the uses of adder in here. And just for demonstration, I'm going to run the tests, but they're going to fail. So let's run an npm test. And we get some failures. And the reason for that is that our tests were using adder as well. So we're going to upgrade those real quick too. So here's an example. We'll replace it, replace those, replace this with max, replace this with min. See if there's any more adder calls. There aren't. So we'll save this file and we'll run our tests again. And Firefox should launch. Sweet. So now we're using Candifying instead of can map. We can actually uninstall can map, and we can uninstall the can map define plugin that we were using too. And just because we didn't run this before, we'll run our build process, and it'll create the dist files, and that's all successful. Sweet. Any questions or comments before we move on?
Oh, makes sense to me.
Cool. So again, this isn't something that you have to do on your project. We'll continue to, like, CanMap will continue to exist and we'll accept bug patches for it. But this is kind of like a next step to being on the latest and greatest CanJS 3 code. Continuing through the guide, there's information about if you were depending on change events on CanMap, those you don't get those anymore with Candifying. So we include some example code of what you can start using. Similarly, if you're using can model, it's actually using can connect behind the scenes because we have kind of a backwards compatible constructor in can connect that works for can model. We're not using can model or can connect in our plugin code, so this isn't applicable to us. So kind of moving on to the last sections, these also aren't applicable. The event callbacks for a component don't have their elements wrapped as jQuery or a DOM library or with a DOM library. So this is a change where if you're using CanJQuery or CanJQuery legacy, then that's something that you'll want to update. And then the new binding syntax that we introduced in CanJS 2.3 is kind of the way forward. We're considering deprecating and removing the old syntax, or we're considering removing the old syntax in maybe a future version of CanStash bindings. So for now, you can continue to use it, but that's just another, like, above and beyond. You can avoid future deprecations and removals by upgrading to the new binding syntax. Sweet. I think that is everything. We started off with a DoneJS plugin that was on CanJS 2, and now we have one that's on CanJS 3. It uses the individual modules instead of just the main can module, and we even upgraded from using CanMap to Candifying to take advantage of its better syntax, and it's faster and a few other features. So with that, are there any other questions or comments before we call it?
Didn't we in 2.3, didn't somebody build a mustache converter? A script you could run to like update your old mustache to stash templates?
Yeah, there's a Can, I know there's a Can upgrade project.
Okay.
Go to GitHub. There's PR for to update. And it's not something that we're officially recommending yet. Like pick actually, you know, make sure that there's already a P, so it might work great.
Okay.
Great right now. Need someone for it. Other questions or comments?
Nope.
All right. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. And hopefully we'll know what subject will be next week, but I'm sure we'll have another Wednesday training. So thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thank you, Jason.
See ya.
Yep.